Good morning. We begin by thanking our sponsors of Talmud Torah for the month, as well as the sponsors of today's daf. Thank you to Malka Esterson in memory of their parents' commemoration of the yahrzeits, Yitzchak, Laib, and Aharon HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda Bas Henech Efraim, in honor of the Rav for the kehilla. And Daf Yomi today is sponsored by Wiseman, in memory of his mother, Dorothy Wiseman, Devora Miriam Bas Moshe HaKohen, the Shama should have an Aliyah, and the family should have an Aharon. We're beginning today. Today's daf is Daf Yomi, a brand new parak. We begin at the Mishnah at the bottom of Yudches Amud Beis. So just a couple brief words of Hakdama to this parak. This parak starts off with a very long Mishnah, similar to the last parak, and it describes a number of days when we fast right away. In other words, there's no build-up over here. These are days where it's so intense and so severe that we begin right away with the fasts. And then the parak goes on to a number of fascinating Gemaras. Some of these stories are actually very famous stories, but it's a number of very, very beautiful stories as we go through the parak. I don't know if we'll be able to start it today. The stories begin at the bottom of Yotes Amud Beis. But just to borrow a word from the Rav, these are incredible Amudim of Gemara over here, and you don't want to miss out on these ones. So the whole parak, really, is a tremendous opportunity to really see these stories, where they come from, the makar of these stories. As a matter of fact, some even refer to this parak as the parak. I believe it's called the parak of Hasidim because it shows such unbelievable stories. So it's a very fascinating parak with some really overwhelming, riveting gemaras over here in this parak. So the Mishnah begins. Seder Tanios Elu Ha'amor B'Revia Rishona. All these previous Taanis, all the previous fasts that we talked about, that the way that they build up and the way that they ultimately build through the process, that was all talking about when we went to different seasons. We got to the first season, it didn't start raining yet. So we're anticipating what may happen. We're starting to see a brewing problem. However, Avot Tzmachim Sheshanu, once we're at any point in time where the plants that are starting to grow are not growing properly, they're already changing, Masriyan Aleim Miyad. Right away, we start being Masri on them. So now it's important to note that the lashon of the Mishnah, the actual words in the Mishnah, say Masriyim Aleim Miyad. It doesn't say that we'll fast as well, but this is a machlokas. Rashi says by Tzmachim Sheshanu, it's the second line in Rashi in this parak. Avot Tzmachim Sheshanu at the end, and the third line, Shenishtanim Minhagam Tachas Chita Yatza Choch Tachas Torah Ba'asha, and it goes on at the end of that Rashi, it says Shekol Chomer Ha'achronos Noeg Behen. These days include all the chomer of all the fast days. In other words, even though the term is Masriyan Alei Miyad, Rashi seems to indicate that it has all the chomers of the fast days. Now the second case where we get right into fasting is Chen Shapasku Geshamim Ben Geshem LeGeshem. In other words, it started raining, but between rains there was a 40-day lapse of time. 40 days is considered to be a very significant measure of time. It's not just that there was a lapse of rain for 40 days, and it's just a period of time, but 40 days is a whole chelek of time. But there's a whole period of time when there's no rain. That's considered to be a very immediate problem, which needs to be addressed right away. And why is that? This is already considered a food shortage. Once we have a food shortage, and a food shortage in any way, so that's when we start fasting right away. Yardu litzmachim, avalo yardu ilan. It started raining, but it's only enough rain for smaller plants, but it's not enough rain for trees. Or the opposite, li'ilam lo litzmachim. You have rain, but the rain is only good for trees, but not for small plants. I assume that this means that there's like a major storm. You have a major downpour, So you'll get enough water for the trees will be fine, they'll survive. But the major downpour that comes, if it doesn't come along with some normal rain as well, it's just going to destroy all the plants. Lazeh ulazeh. In other words, it's good enough for trees and for plants. It's not enough to fill up all the cisterns, the little pits that exist. Those are very important. Not talking about a period of time when there's running water. So in order to be able to store water, it's very important that you're able to fill up. They had a number, each town had pits, they had cisterns that they used to gather the water. Now, if they don't have enough to fill those up, that's already a problem. So Masriya Lemiyad, we are Masriya. Masriya means we blow the shofar and we cry out right away. V'chein ir shelo yardu alei geshamim, a city shelo yardu alei geshamim. So this is an interesting case because it's not talking about a whole area. It's one specific city seems to be excluded. And this one city somehow always misses out on the rain. In other words, it's raining in other places, but this one city does not get any rain, so it's obviously suffering the consequences of not having rain. The chsiv him tarti al ir achas, al ir achas lo amtir chelka achas tamtir. In other words, this is a pasuk which is indicating that when one city doesn't have any rain, that's considered to be a very bad sign. So if there's one city that's excluded, and one city does not have any rain, that city will be masriya le'miyad. Again, masriya literally means they'll blow the shofar and they'll cry out. And as we mentioned, it seems to be there's a machlokas rishonim if this includes a regular fast as well. Osa ir misana umisraas v'chos v'yoseh misana. So here, when it comes to this last case where one city is excluded, so the Mishnah says Osa ir misana, that one city fasts umasras and it blows the shofar. V'chos v'yoseh misanos v'lo masrias. So here something else is included. Not only does that city have to fast, but the surrounding cities as well have to fast. V'lo masrias. They don't have to actually blow the shofar. They don't have to actually go out and cry out, but they just have to fast. Now, why is this? So it seems like there's two understandings. Rashi takes the approach of it's a simple practical reason why the surrounding cities are going to have to fast. Because what happens if there's one city that has no rain? They're going to rely on the surrounding cities to supply them with all the food. So they're going to have a supply chain crisis. Because they're not going to have enough food because what they normally stock themselves with in those surrounding cities is going to be, again, the normal stock. But all of a sudden, a whole other city comes to their stores to go shopping, and there's not going to be enough food left. So therefore, it's not just a tzara, it's not just a problem for the city that has no rain, it's actually going to have a residual effect on all the surrounding cities. So Rashi takes the approach that it's a simple practical problem that they have. It's the second line in Rashi, Lefikach Misanos, She'osa ha'ir, Shelo yardo aleh geshamim, Telech liknos ha'tavua, Ba'osa ha'ir, v'yeh barav. In other words, there isn't enough in every city to supply all the cities that have shortages, and therefore they have to fast as well to prevent themselves from having a problem of not having enough food. There are others who seem to understand that the reason why there's a fast is simply because if your neighbor is suffering, neighbor has no rain, so even if it's not going to actually directly impact you, but your neighbor is right next to you suffering, they have nothing to eat, so therefore they'll fast. V'kiva omer masrios v'lo masanos. It's the opposite. They could cry out, they could blow the shofar, they could do all types of tshuva, but ultimately the bottom line is they're not mechuyev to fast because they have enough food. They have everything that they need. It's raining, the crop is growing, all the plants are going, and therefore there's no reason for them to have to fast. V'chein ir sheyesh ba dever. This is the fifth case where we're going to go straight in to right away getting into the chumros of the end of the fast season. In other words, as we mentioned in the previous prakim, there's a buildup of how we get to there. Another case where we're going to get right into the fast is M'chein ir sheyesh ba dever, Omapolis. A city, this is the fifth and sixth case, is if there's a plague. If there's a plague in the city, and people are dying, Omapolis, or if there's, Mapolis literally means that houses are crumbling. I'm not sure if this necessarily means that there are earthquakes, or if there's just major tornadoes, but the fact is there's some type of natural disaster that's occurring that's causing that the homes are falling down. So Osa ir misana, umasras, v'chos v'yoseh misanos v'lo masrios. All those cities, they have to fast, Mis'ana u'masras, so that city itself that is suffering, they fast and they blow the shofar. In the surrounding cities, they fast, but they do not have to blow the shofar. And Kiva Omar, Masrios lo Masanos, makes the same argument as before, that they don't have to fast, but what they do have to do is they have to blow the shofar. So the Gemara has to ask, the Mishnah asks a question right here: what's considered a dever? At what point do we consider something to be a plague that requires fasting? Ezeu dever. What is a dever? So the Mishnah answers: Ir hamotzia chamesh meos ragle v'yatzu mimena gimel mesim. A city that has 500 ragle, literally means feet. So if 3 of them are going to die, begimel yamim, in 3 days, zeh achar zeh, consecutively, harei zeh dever. Pachas mikan ein zeh dever. In other words, out of 500 people, 3 people need to die 3 days in a row. Now it's interesting, I just looked up this halacha in Shulchan Aruch, and in Shulchan Aruch it's quoted very clearly, but Mechaber adds something in, which he takes from the Rambam. This is in Siman Taf Kuf Ayin Vav, in Sif Beis. The Mechaber writes as follows: V'chein al dever. Similarly, when it comes to a dever, to a plague, and the Mechaber asks, Ezeu dever, ir sheish bataf kuf ragle, 500 people, v'yatzu mimena shlosh mesim, v'shlosh yamim ze achar ze. Exactly what our Mishnah says. Harei ze dever. Yatzu b'yom echad, o b'yom dalid. Yatzu b'yom echad, o b'dalid yamim, ein ze dever. If it's all in one day, so that's one bad day. That doesn't mean it's a plague. If it happens over 4 days, that's not either a dever. And he goes on to continue at the end. He writes, "Ve'ena nashim v'aktanim v'zakenim she'shavsu mimalacha b'chlal minyan anshe hamadina." We do not include the women. We do not include the children or the zakenim she'shavsu mimalachta. In other words, they're understanding from here that it has to be that they are people who are actively involved in day-to-day affairs. Why? Because it has to actually be indicative of the fact that there's really a plague here. It can't be that there's anything else which contributes to it. And Mishnah Berurah comments, these people, those people, in other words, children and elderly people who we can't necessarily attribute their death directly to the plague. In other words, there could be all types of confounding reasons as to why these people died. So that doesn't necessarily quantify this as a plague. So this number of 3 out of 500 has to be a solid 3 out of 500 people who there's no other explainable reason as to why they died. So 3 people in 3 days out of 500 people die. That's considered a plague. If it goes anywhere out of that, so that's not considered a plague. It could be a terrible tragedy, but it's not going to be a plague that's going to require fasting. Pachos Mikan, the Mishnah writes, Ein Zedever. Al Elu Masriyim B'chol Makom. The following things, we actually, Masriya, we'll blow the shofar all over the place, not just in the place where the problem is taking place. Al Shidafon, Val Yarkon, Val Arba, Val Chasel. This is, so Shidafon is when there are very strong winds, and it messes up the produce. Val Yarkon, it's some type of disease. It's a holy, Rashi says. Val Arba is locust, Val Chasel is another type of locust. Val Chaya Ra, and if there are wild animals, Val Cherev, Rashi tells us is there are army men. There's a invasion happening. Masriyan Aleim B'pnei Shimakim Ma'alechas. All these things that are not location specific. They travel. All these problems, they can travel from one city to the next. So therefore, once they start happening, then Masriyan Aleim B'chol Makom. Now it's interesting. The Mishnah writes, Al Elu Masrim B'chol Makom. So B'chol Makom seems to be all over the place. So what does all over the place mean? So I think this is something which we have to adjust to the times, because in the time of the Mishnah, you didn't just open up your Twitter feed and then find out that there was an invasion happened someplace on the other side of the world. You didn't hear about these things. B'chol Makom, my understanding is any place that you'll hear about it. So word spreads from city to city by word of mouth. But the fact that you could just turn on the news and watching the nightly news, you could hear all types of devastating stories that happen all over the world. That's not going to require that every person who watches the news at night has to then go ahead and fast the next day. So, in other words, these stories, the problem is that they are problems that travel from place to place, and therefore, if you heard about it, you have to worry about the fact that it must be close enough to you that you heard about it. So, Maisa, there was a story. Sheyardu Zakenim Yerushalayim la'Arayim. The Zakenim from Yerushalayim went into their city. V'gazru Taanis al Shenira Kamali pi Tanar Shidafon ba'Ashkelon. They noticed, so Ashkelon over here, Rashi says it's Plishtim. It's not Ashkelon in the literal sense of the word Ashkelon is a city that we know nowadays as Ashkelon. In other words, they saw Kamali pi Shidafon ba'Ashkelon. They saw like the opening of an oven of shidafon. Shidafon, as we described, was damaged crops as a result of the wind, and immediately just seeing that amount caused them to be gozer Taanis to institute a fast day. They also instituted a fast day because wolves ate 2 children, and therefore once they saw that happened, they said if there are wolves over here in the city who are eating 2 children, so then they instituted a fast day right away. It's a terrible tragedy. Sorry, 2 wolves, 8 children on the other side of the Jordan. He says it wasn't even the story that they actually were eaten. The tragedy didn't even take place yet. But they saw wolves roaming around, and they realized that this is a very dangerous thing. People have their children outside playing. If there are wolves, wild animals, that are roaming around, this is definitely something which is a danger to everybody in the city, and therefore they instituted a fast day. Now the Mishnah goes on to another discussion, which is, at what point is something considered so severe that will even be masriya on Shabbos? Will even blow the shofar and cry out on Shabbos. Al elu masriya b'Shabbos. On the following, we are going to cry out on Shabbos. Al ir shikifu nachrim o nahar al sfinus. The strangers came. Obviously, this is talking about strangers who are coming with a threat, or it's being taken over by the nar, by the water, valsfina hamitarefes, on a boat that it's kind of flailing out there in the water. It didn't actually capsize yet, but it's something which is it's in grave danger. Valsfina hamitarefes bayam, Yossi omer la'azar v'lo l'tzak. Yossi says, in these type of things that we cried on Shabbos, it's not just crying out. There has to be that you're calling out for something practical to be done, that you want someone to come help you. But just to cry out, we don't do that on Shabbos. Even on a plague, the Chachamim did not agree to. So this is actually a practical halacha that we have to know. The halacha is brought down as well in Taf Kuf Ayin Vav, as where I mentioned before, the halachas of Taanis. But this is halacha in Hilchas Shabbos in Reish Pei Ches in Shulchan Aruch. These are the halachas of fasting, or any fast, or a Taanis Chalom on Shabbos. And in Shulchan Aruch it writes, this is in Reish Pei Ches, if tes ein tzoakim v'lo masriyim bo al shum tzara, it's referring to Shabbos, chutz mitzaras hamazonos shetzoakin alea the peh b'Shabbos lo b'shofar. If there are issues with food, in other words, there's a famine, there's not enough food, we can cry out on Shabbos, but again, we don't blow the shofar. And he writes, the Mechaber continues, v'chein, ir shehikifua anosim, o nahar, people are forcing the way into a city to invade it. O nahar usfina matarefes bayam, there is a city which is being overtaken by the water, where there's a boat which is about to capsize on the sea. Even if one person is in danger from people who are forcing him to do whatever it might be, it could be they're forcing him to be drafted. Again, a draft, when we're talking about the draft in the times of, quoting the Rambam, or even early in times of the Gemara, we're not talking about the civilized army over here, holistim, or thieves, or ruach ra. Zorkin u'mischanenin b'tfilos b'Shabbos havol ein token. We do actually cry out with tfilos on Shabbos, but we don't blow the shofar. Elam kein token l'kabei tza'am la'azar la'acheim latzila. The only time we're going to allow someone to blow the shofar on Shabbos is for a practical reason. Sometimes we just need manpower. We need people to come to help out. So the only way to do that is blow the shofar. People hear the shofar blowing, everyone says, come out of your house, come help us. And at the end, in Sif Yud, the Rama writes, and this is an important halacha, because technically speaking, how is a person allowed to go ahead and spend time on Shabbos with extra tchinos to daven for a chola, daven for someone who's not well? So, from this halacha, from our Mishnah, is where we're learning that somebody who is a chola sheish bo sakana, someone who's sick with any type of illness, which is a sakana, which poses great danger to their life, you're allowed to daven for them and tzarkim and to cry out publicly for them on Shabbos. And this is the reason why you're allowed to make a mishaberach for cholim on Shabbos, because we're talking about cholim who are in serious condition, and therefore, even though it's Shabbos, and generally on Shabbos we don't say tchinos ubakashas that are not relevant. Again, tchinos ubakashas are not specifically relevant to Shabbos. So, but when it comes to chol sheish bo sakana, someone who is ill with a grave danger, a serious illness, we're allowed to be mispal for them on Shabbos. And the poskim tell us, once you're already saying Mishtaberach, and you're saying Mishtaberach for people who are very ill, you could add anybody in who needs a refuah shlema, even if we're talking about somebody who is no longer in a state where they're in a chol sheish bo sakana, but anybody, that's why you could add in any names to the Mishtaberach on Shabbos. But the ikar heter, in other words, the foundation of this heter, what makes it permissible for us to say Mishtaberach on Shabbos is based off the fact that we're being mispala, we're davening for people who are in a situation of sakana. The Mishnah continues, Al kol tzara shelo tavo ala tzibor, any tzara that we're trying to prevent from coming on the tzibor, on the public congregation, masriyan aleim, we cry out, chutz mi rov geshamim, besides for rov geshamim, for too much rain. Maisa, Mishnah continues. There was a story, Sha'amru lo l'choni ma'agal, the famous story of Choni ma'agal. They said to Choni ma'agal, hispalel sheyerdu geshamim. In other words, they were dealing with a situation where there's not enough rain. They said to Choni ma'agal, do us a favor, you are able to be mispalel, your tefillos will be accepted, please be mispalel that there should be rain. Amar lahem, he said to them, Tsu'u, go outside, v'achnisu tanurei psachim, b'shvil shelo yumoku. Go take your earthenware ovens inside. In other words, you had your ovens that you used for Pesach, and they had left it outside, because again, it was dry, it was not raining. He said to them, listen, I'm going to start davening, but I want you guys to realize it's going to work. So, take all your ovens, all your earthenware kelim inside, because if you leave them outside, they're going to get wet, they're going to get ruined. Espalo, he davened, v'lo yardu geshamim. It didn't rain. Ma'asa, og uga, v'omad v'tocha. So this word og uga means he caked a cake. What does og uga mean? So Rashi later on tells us on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, uga is a shura agula. It's a round circle. Kimo uga shi agula, because the cake is round. So og uga here means he drew a round circle. V'amad b'socha, he stood in the middle. V'amar lefanav Ribono Shalom, he said, Ribono Shalom Hashem, Banecha samu paneim alai. Your children came to me, they're relying on me. Sha'ani ben bayis lefanecha, I'm like a member of your household. Nishba ani b'shmecha agadol, b'shimcha agadol, I'm swearing in your name. She'eni zaz mikan ad shetarachim al banecha, I'm not leaving the circle until you ultimately have rachmanis. You have mercy on your children, and let it rain. So what happened? It started to rain, it started drizzling. Amar lo kach sha'alti. No. This is not what I asked for. I didn't ask for it to be drizzling. I didn't go through all this for a little bit of a drizzle. So what happened? Elagishme boros, sichin maros. I am waiting for all the cisterns to be filled up with rain. Hischilu leirid bezaf. It started pouring. In other words, a massive downpour. Amar, no. It's not either what I asked for. Lo kach shalti. El gishmi ratzon bracha unadava. He said, I wanted to rain a normal rain. I wanted to rain a consistent rain, a normal rain with a significant amount of water, but I don't want everything to be destroyed in the middle. So what happened? Yardu ketiknan. It came down normally. Ad sheyatzu Yisrael Yerushalayim l'Harabayis b'nei Geshamim. It rained so much, everyone had to ultimately go out of their homes to go to the Harabayis, which was much higher than every place else. So in other words, they had to go to a higher elevation because of the amount of water that came down. Bo for Amrulo, they came to him. And the Chachamim said to him, Kishem, she'espalal ta'aleim she'yerdu kach espal she'yelchu lahem. In other words, now it's been raining significantly, now please be mispal that it should stop raining. Amaleh and Su'u Ru'u im nimches Evan HaToin. Let's see if the Evan HaToin got ultimately, if it got wet enough that it started to dissolve. Shalach lo Shimon ben Shetach went to, he sent a message to Choni Ma'agel, and he said, Ilmale Choni Atav, not for the fact that you are Choni Ma'agel, goes Rani Alechanida, I put you in Cherem. Why? Because it's not the way you speak to Hashem. Go into a circle, put yourself in the circle and say, listen up. Here's the deal. I'm not getting out of the circle until it starts raining. Then it starts raining, you say, excuse me? That's not what I asked of you. And then again, you're still not listening properly. It's just not the way a person should be talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But again, Yichoni Ma'agel, so therefore I'll leave you alone. Aval ma'asa lecha, sha'ata mischat lefnei hamakom, v'osa lecha ritzonecha. You speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu this way, and Hashem listens to you. What is that similar to? Keben shu mischati alaviv, like a child that does something wrong to his father, like a spoiled child. V'osa le ritzon, of course nobody knows of this, but in case anybody is not familiar, sometimes there are some children who take advantage of their parents, and they don't speak properly, they don't ask for things properly, they're not properly thankful. And what happens? The father still listens to the child, even though his behavior is not up to par. There's a certain relationship between parents and their children, where even though sometimes the children don't act appropriately, nevertheless the parents listen to them. So he's saying, Choni Ma'agel, indeed, you are correct. You're like a ben bayis. You lived in the house of the Ribono Shel Olam. So indeed, you're like a child to the Ribono Shel Olam, and therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu accepted your tefillos. So now the Mishnah continues. Hayu mis'anin v'yardu lan geshamim. Everyone in the city took upon themselves a fast day, and it worked. It started raining. So kodem netzachama, if it started raining before netzachama, lo yashlimu. They could say, listen, fast day is off. It's canceled. Everyone can go home and eat breakfast. La'achar hanetzachama, if after the sun already came up, then yashlimu, they should finish the fast. Because, perhaps, only because they're in a fast day, they have to finish the whole fast day. Lezer Omer, kodem chatzos, before chatzos, lo yashlimu, la'achar chatzos yashlimu. He pushes it all the way up to chatzos. Maisa, there was a story, Shegazru Taanis Belud, they instituted a fast day in Lud. V'yardu lahem geshamim kodem chatzos. Started raining before midday. And Amar lahem Rabbi Tarfon Tzu'u v'achlu v'shasu v'asu yamtiv. You could go out, you could eat, you could drink. Not only that, you should make a yamtov. Why? Because your tefillah was niskabel. Your tefillos, your prayers were accepted. V'yatzu v'achlu v'shasu. They left, they went out, they ate, they drank. V'asu yamtiv. They made a major yamtov for holiday on that day. Ubal kol haravim v'kor halal hagadol. Everyone came, and they said halal hagadol. And it's important to mention that I think this is a very important part of the Mishnah. Again, today is Hanukkah. We say halal today. A very big part of any Eis Tzara is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes it away from us. Is that we don't just snap right back into regular life. Here there was a fast day, so I'm assuming it was a fast day. People were prepared. Maybe they took on less work that day. They took off for the day, or they had a half a day of work. But ultimately, it was a fast day. Everyone was prepared for a fast day. And why? Because they recognized there was not enough rain. They needed rain in order to be able to support themselves, to be able to support the crop. What happened? Started raining. So they didn't just schedule all their appointments back in for the day and just get back into regular life. They said, you know what? We took off the day because we wanted to go ahead and daven to Hashem and to cry out to have our tefillos be accepted. So now that our tefillos were accepted, what should we do? Let's flip the day, make it into a Yom Tov. Let's spend time together, let's come to shul, and let's sing Hallel. Let's thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Such an important part of any Eis Tzara is that when the tefillah is niskavel, is that we actually spend the time to say thank you, to actually recognize that the tzara went away, and we have what to be thankful for. It's a great opportunity on Rosh Chodesh also at the end of the week, but on Chanukah, which is a day which is instituted as days of Hallel v'Hodah, that we use these days to actually be thankful for the wonderful things that happen. There's a famous story, I read it in a book, about Reb Chaim Kanievsky. That someone once came to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and someone was very, very ill. And he asked Reb Chaim to please be mispalel for this person to have refuah shalema. And what happened? The person had refuah shalema. And many years later, this person came back to Reb Chaim, and whatever he came to ask him for, Reb Chaim said to him, how is so-and-so doing? And he said, oh, that person, they're better for years already. And he said to them, I was mispalel for this person every single day. You came to me, you asked me to be mispalel for this person to have refuah shalema, and I was mispalel. And every single day I have this person in mind to have refuah shalema. And people forget to go back, even when it's not necessarily even with Ribono Shalom. How many times do we ask people, Gedolim, to be mispalel for somebody? It's important to go back and say, thank you. The tefillah was niskavel, of course, to be thankful to HaKodesh Baruch Hu, but to be thankful to those who are mispalel on their behalf as well. Running out of time, we got to get moving over here. Seder Taanis ha'elu ha'amar b'Revia Rishona. Now the Gemara paraphrases the first line of the Mishnah. V'ramini, there's a stira, a contradiction. Revia Rishona, v'shniya lishal. The first and the second one is to be shoel, to ask for rain. Shlishis lisanos. The third period of time where there's no rain is for fasting. So why are we going into it right away over here? Amar Rav Yehuda hachi kamar seder tainios ha'amor ema saibes man shiyatz Revi Rishona. The seder, the normal way, the normal process of introducing these fast days is, it follows what happens by the first season, the second season. Shiyatz Revi Rishona v'shniya v'shlishis. V'lo yardu geshamim. That's when it goes through season 1, 2, 3, when we're expecting rain. Avol yardu geshamim b'Revi Rishona v'zaru v'lo tzamchu. But if it rained, what happened? V'lo tzamchu, nothing grew. Inami tzamchu v'chazru v'nishtanu masriyin. They planted, and then something, it went back and it changed. Masriyin alei miyad. That's when we cry out right away. In other words, we're talking about when there's a noticeable problem, things are not growing well. Amar Rav Nachman, dafka nishtanu. When are we going to fast right away? That's specifically talking about a case when it changed, when the crop is not growing properly. It's recognizable that something's different here. Avol yavshu, if it just dried up, no. Lo, in such a case, we're not going to fast. Mar says pshita. Of course. Why would we expect that if something dried up, that you're going to fast? Nishtanu tanan, it says it changed. In other words, the crop is not growing properly. Gemara says, Lo tzricha, it's talking about, we need to say it's talking about a case, di akun. In other words, it started to grow again. In other words, it changed, but then it started to go back to what would it be expected to be normal. So ma'u detema, I may have thought, akanta milsahi, this change, in other words, this reversal is actually something significant, and maybe it will grow properly. Kamash Milan that no. If once it started changing, we assume it's changed and it's no good. Now, Mishnah said, v'chein shepasku geshamim, ben geshem legeshem. Which means that it started raining, but then there was a significant block of time, a 40-day block of time when there was no rain. In those cases, we fast right away, and the Mishnah says, because it's a makkah shel batzoros. It's a makkah of a food shortage, it's a famine, and that's very serious, we fast right away. So my makkah batzoros. What is this makkah batzoros? Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, makkah hamevia lidei batzoros. It's any type of makkah, any type of plague, any type of circumstance which leads to a famine. Rav Nachman, nahara batzoros. If you have to cross the river, that's considered a betzoros, a food shortage. Medinta amedinta, not only a food shortage, that's considered a kafna, a real serious famine. V'amram Chanina sa b'sa v'shchicha b'tzorta. Sa b'sela. If a sa is worth the sela, this is talking about literally inflation. That money was not worth the amount of money that was normally worth. In other words, a sa b'sela, instead of being a 4 sa in a sela, so that is where money is not worth as much. However, v'shchicha, food is widely available. In other words, even though it's more expensive, but it's widely available, that's betzorta, that's called the food shortage. Arba v'lo shchicha, if it's 4 in a sela, v'lo shchicha, in other words, even though people have money, but you can't find food to buy, kafna, that's a famine. Amar Rav Yochanan lo shana el bezman shamos bezol. That's only talking about when the money is cheap. In other words, money is accessible. People have money. Uperis biyoker, but the fruit, the actual food that you're trying to buy, is very expensive. Aval mos biyoker, if there are high rates of inflation, uperos bezol, and food is cheap, then masrin alei miyad, because you can't buy it. You don't have any money. The Amar Rav Yochanan nehira. I remember seeing when it was dalit in besela. In other words, that's the normal price. In other words, people's stomachs were bloated. So again, this is determining what level of famine we're discussing. And the idea is you could have money, but if there's nothing to buy, that's still a problem. You can have what to buy, but not have any money. That's also considered to be a problem. The Mishnah says, "Yardu l'tzmachim avalo le'ilan." The Gemara is now going to analyze what it means when it rains enough for plants, but not for a tree. So, "Bishlam l'tzmachim lo le'ilan." I can understand what it means when there's enough rain for regular plants, but not for a tree. Meshkachas lo, you find that the asa nicha v'lo asa razya. In other words, it rains very softly, but doesn't rain heavily. So the trees need a lot of heavy rain. L'Ilan, v'lo l'tzmachim, that there's enough rain for the trees, but there's not enough for the actual plants. The Asya Razya rains very heavy, v'lo Asya Nicha doesn't rain softly. So that is not going to help for the small plants. L'zeh u'l'zeh, a case which is l'zeh u'l'zeh, avolo l'boros, v'lo l'sichel l'maros, there's enough rain for trees and for plants, but not for boros, sichlim aros, which means the cisterns and the pits where they store the water. Mashkachas, you could find such a case. Ta'as yurazya vinicha. It rains very heavy, and it also rains very softly. Miu tuva lo asya. In other words, it rains heavy downpour, but not enough, so it doesn't fill up the cisterns. Elahad Tanya, that it says in the Brisa, yardu lebaros l'sichlim aros. It rained enough to fill up the cisterns and the pits. How do you have such a case where there's enough water to fill up all the cisterns, but there's not enough for the trees and the plants? How does that work? Our answer is the asya b'shvichusa. It has like a massive downpour. So what happens is it fills up so quick, but it doesn't have enough time to absorb into the ground. Masrian ala ilanos beprosa pesach. We start to call out for the trees beprosa pesach. Prosa pesach literally means halfway till Pesach, so about half a month before Pesach. Al boros sichlim aros beprosa chag. If there's not enough rain to fill up the boros sichlim aros halfway till Sukkot, Val kulon in England mayim rishtos masriyan leim. If you don't have anything to drink, you're a masriya. We cry out right away. Masriyan leim miyad. Ve'eza miyad shalahen. When we say miyad, what does that mean? Even though miyad means right away, like we said in last parak, we only start a fast on Sheni v'chamish v'sheni, on Monday, Thursday, and Monday. We only call out in that area. But askara, another case, askara, I believe the askara in modern day medicine is croup, right? It's something which is some type of illness in the throat. Bizman sheyesh ben mitzvah, if it's actually causing people to die, masriyan aleim, we cry out. Bizman sheyesh ben mitzvah, no one's dying from it. A masriyan aleim. In other words, it doesn't mean just to forget about it, but we're not going to institute a public day of Yom Teruah. Masriyan al guvai, we cry out on guvai and locust, b'chol shehu, even if this is a little bit, because they cause major damage. Shimon Elazar Omer, af al chagav, even on another type of grasshoppers or locusts. Tana Rabbanan, masriyan al ilanos. we cry out on the trees, b'shar shnei shavua, in all the rest of the years, not, in other words, not Shemitah. Al boros sichlim aros afilu b'shvius, even during Shemitah. You could cry out on trees that are suffering even during Shvius. Why? Even though you yourself can't do business with them, the poor people come to eat from it. Tanya Idach learned in another brisa. You could cry out for trees during the rest of the year. Al boros sichlim aros afilu b'shvius, on even during Shemitah. It's the same brisa again. Af alilanos, even on trees, we call out masrian and af alilanos, even on trees. The Gemara continues, Mishnah continues. Masrian ala sfichin, we cry out. So the Gemara continues. Masrian ala sfichin, we cry out. Sfichin are plants that grow by themselves. B'shvius, even during the years of Shemitah. Why? Because the aniyim rely on this to eat. Tanya, we learned to the Brayso, Amar ben Pratia. Rav Lazar ben Pratia said, Miyon Shachar Beis HaMikdash, from the day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Na'asu Geshamim Tzumukim. Rain became very unpredictable. Na'asu Geshamim Tzumukim La'olam, rain became something very unpredictable to the world. Yesh Shana Shegeshamea Merubim, there are some years that there's lots of rain. Yesh Shana Shegeshamea Mu'atim, there are some years when there's not a lot of rain. Yesh Shana Shegeshamea Yardim Bizmanon, there are years when the rain comes, when the rain falls in its right time. Yesh Shana She'en Geshamea Yardim Bizmanon, there are some times and some seasons when the rain does not fall in the right time. Shana Shegeshamea Yardim Bizmanon Lamahu Doma, what is a year when it rains in the right time? What's that similar to? Le'eved shenasan lo rabbi parnasaso be'echad b'Shabbos. To a servant where his master gave him his food on Sunday. So what happens is, nimtzas isa nefes ketikna. He has enough time before Shabbos to prepare everything that he needs to have a proper loaf of bread. And nechelas ketikna, when he eats it, it tastes fine. Shana she'en geshameh yardim bizmanon. A year when the rain does not fall in the right time. Lamahu doma. What's that similar to? Le'eved shenasan lo rabbi parnasaso be'erev Shabbos. His master shows up right there on Erev Shabbos and gives him all the ingredients. Nimtzas isa nefesh lo ketikna. He doesn't have enough time to process everything to have a proper loaf of bread. And therefore, v'ne'achelash lo ketikna, he doesn't eat it properly. Now, the Gemara continues, Shana shegeshamea merubin, a year when there's lots of rain. Lamahu doma, what's that similar to? Le'eved shnasan lo rabba parnasaso bevasachas. It's like a servant who gets everything all at one lump sum, one massive payment. Nimtzu rechaim tochnos minakor, masha tochnos minakav, v'nimtzas isa ochelos minakor, kmo ochelos minakav. Just very briefly, every time you put your grain into the grinding mill, there's a certain amount of the grain that gets lost and gets stuck to the side of the grinding mill. It's always the same amount that gets stuck to the side of the grinding mill, because the grinding mill is always the same size. So if you put in a lot of grain at once, what ends up happening is, you end up, your final product is much more because the same amount gets stuck to the grinding mill. But if you do small amounts, time after time, every time you lose the same percentage, and therefore, if you add up that percentage every time you grind it, you lose more. So that's the mashal over here. Shana shegishameh mu'atim ma'u domeh. What's that similar to when there's not enough rain? Le'eved, to a servant shnasan lo rabba parnasaso ma'at. His master gave him his parnasa, his sustenance in small amounts. Ma'at ma'at. Nimtzu rechayim mashatochnos minakor. What the rechayim, with the grinding mill, grinds up from one core, which is a measurement, tochnos minakav. It takes from a smaller measurement of a kav. And nimtzas isa kamasho ochelos minakor, ochelos minakav. The amount that it takes away from a core, it takes away from the kav, he loses much more food. Devora, another example, there's man, shegeshamea murubim, when there's lots of rain, lamau, dome, la'adam shemegabel satit, person who is mixing cement. Im, yeshlo mayim rabim, he has a lot of water, mayim einam kolam vatit megubel, the water does not get properly absorbed, Im yeshlo mayim rabim, if he has a lot of water, so then mayim einam kolam, the water does not get used up. Vatit megubel yafa, the cement gets mixed up properly. Im yeshlo mayim muatim, if he only has a little bit of water, mayim kolam vatit einam misgabel yafa, the water gets used up too quickly, and he does not have a properly mixed cement, and that is a problem. We will stop here at Tanur Rabbanan. This is the story which starts story of Nakdim and Ben Gurion, which is, again, the beginning of a very fascinating number of Amudim, and really unbelievable Gemaras coming up. And pretty much all of them I got up to the end of the parak. They're really fascinating Gemaras. Have a wonderful day.